Hello, everyone. Welcome back to my channel. This is Mark Turi, and welcome to an irregular Tuesday stream because tomorrow I will be busy, unfortunately. Won't be able to stream at a regular time, a regular day. So I thought I would do one day early this week. So that's why I'm here on a Tuesday evening. But I hope everyone out there is doing well. I just want to first thank everyone who showed up to my stream with Marilyn just a couple days ago with Marilyn Honig. I reached a milestone. I had with Marilyn, I was able to reach over 50 subscribers on my YouTube channel, and as of yesterday, I'm at 113 subscribers. So I've doubled, and I'm really happy about that. I thank everybody who is a new subscriber. Thank you to all my subscribers from the original, from the start. I'm really, really appreciative of everyone's support. And again, thank you just very, very much. It's very humbling, very kind of everyone. And I hope to get to another milestone soon so I can get to that 500 soon as well. So be here, if you sort of like what I do. Please, of course, don't forget to like this video if you enjoy it. Also, please, if you haven't already, please subscribe to my channel. Again, it helps. Just every subscriber does help me. And of course, if you like what I do, please leave comments on my videos or on my community tab where you can vote for what you want to be on my Wednesday streams, which, of course, again, today is a little unusual being Tuesday, but normally after my Saturday stream, which I'll get into what we're doing in one moment, I have a poll, a text poll, usually between two options, and whatever gets the highest wins. And in this case, we're going to talk about the four major branches of philosophy, which include metaphysics, epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics. And we'll get into that in a moment. But I just want to say hi to Irish Mart, one of my exalted few here. Thank you, Irish Mart, for your continuing support. It's very, very nice to see you around on different chats like Marilyn and so on and so forth. So it's always good that you're here. Very loyal to this channel. I appreciate it very much. And thank you. I wish you had a great day and a great week. As far as what's going on here, today was unseasonably warm. It was 23 degrees Celsius, although windy, but 23 degrees Celsius, which is for our American friends around 73 degrees Fahrenheit. So for early October, that is pretty warm, and I'm not complaining necessarily, but it was nice. I took a walk around my neighborhood, picked something up from the post office. Thought I would walk because it was such a beautiful day. And although windy and the wind was a little cold, it was still very sunny and very warm, which was again very unusual, but also pretty good, pretty nice. And really can't complain about good weather, especially in in what is now the autumn fall, or will be the autumn fall soon. And I think, of course, in a couple weeks we'll have daylight savings time, so that would be what, fall back, yeah, spring forward, fall back. So it was really, really nice. And as Irish Mart says here, in Ireland was a lovely, lovely 15. Yeah, perfect for walking in the park. That is exactly, exactly. I sort of like that weather. It's quite nice, especially in the autumn. And yeah, so just to go over some what I like to call house cleaning. Not too much going on over here with me. Again, I'm really appreciative from Sunday's chat with Marilyn. So for 2 days ago, got that milestone. Of course, Saturday was really great as well. We did the PowerPoint on the former Yugoslavia. I hope everyone enjoyed that as well. That was a really fun one for me because I got to show you all a picture of what I looked like when I was 6. I think my hairline was a bit not doing too bad, I have to say. At 41, my hairline is not bad. I'm getting a little thin over here, but that's been going on for years. A little gray up here, which also has been going on for years. But again, brought back some fun memories, and I think in the future I will do a different, like a comparison PowerPoint between some of the other pictures that I have from Yugoslavia at that time, and then when I went back last year, and to sort of show how it's changed, a little bit like that, and maybe I can show some pictures from some other places I've been in the Balkans because I really love it there. It's really fun. It's cheap, especially if you're that type of person who doesn't want to pay an arm and a leg for accommodation. You can get some really nice hotel deals in the Balkans, and food is cheap and so forth. Especially if you're on like British pound sterling or the euro, American dollar, Canadian dollar, it goes a long way in Southern Europe. So it's really, really nice, especially in the Balkans. But other than that, I'm just trying to think. Hasn't been haven't really been doing too much. Just continuing all my reading and all my studying all day. Been applying for jobs. Hopefully, get something. That's all. Nothing spectacular. Nothing too shocking. I do want to say that I will be back, of course, on Saturday, regular time, 3 p.m. Eastern, which is 12 in the Pacific time zone if you're in the United States or Canada, and then 8 o'clock in the UK time zone. And we'll be talking. Be doing a first part of a two-part PowerPoint on the history of the German Revolution and Civil War, roughly from November 1918 until around, I guess, April, May of 1919, and looking at some of those things that happened after the war, and even just before the war ended, just a few days before or a week before the war ended. So we're going to look at Germany. We're going to look at the city of Berlin. We're going to look at an uprising, some of the political actors. And then the second part is going to be more the development from those revolutions into the development of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, the Nazi Party, and a little bit on the rise of Hitler. And we're going to stop there at around 1924. So I hope again that those are really good. That's based on an essay that I wrote a few years back. I also did do a PowerPoint like this to another group a few years back. So hopefully it'll get a better reception. Um, and when I mean better reception, I just mean a good reception, I should say. And it'd be a lot of interesting times in a very interesting part, I think, of world history and European history that is not really known too much, um, at least not terribly much in North America, probably more in Europe, probably much more in Germany. But it'll be interesting to see and to hear of our American friends and European friends, North American friends, and all of our friends around the world, if they had ever heard of these events and these people and so on, because it really gives another dynamic into what sort of went on with the rise of Hitler, which is unbelievably important, of course. So yeah, so that's really all I have. Again, I'm hoping everyone has been enjoying my content. Of course, last week, what did we talk about last week? Was it determinism? We talked about, I had my black shirt on. What did we talk about last week? Anyway, we had a lot of fun talking about a lot of different things. Science and scientism, of course, of course, of course. And I hope everyone enjoyed that one too, because it's good to differentiate between the two of those things, to take a step back and kind of reassess some chatter that we hear sometimes from people, especially online, and look at really what sort of things are. And this sort of prompted me to go into this, which is the four major branches of philosophy. Now, the one that this lost out to was about pseudoscience. I'll do that in the future. If it gets enough votes, I'll put the pseudoscience one in for next week. So I'll do that after Saturday's show, and then we'll put something else. If something else through this talk or through my Saturday talk, my Saturday PowerPoint, there's a demand for other another topic, I'll put them in on the vote. But I think that one would also be a very good one to do as well, on pseudoscience and what that really means. But I want to get into, of course, this discussion here today, and I always like to sort of start with some, accountability. First is I have studied philosophy, but I haven't majored in philosophy. I've done a lot of reading with philosophy, but I haven't done everything. And so a lot of this is going to just do is going to just be a general sort of definitions and overview of the schools, and then we're going to look at the different types, um, excuse me, the different branches, I should say. We're looking at the branches first, and we're looking at, going to define what they are. We're going to ask some questions and things like this, and then we're going to get into specific schools of thought within these branches, and some of them will be known, I think, especially um, if you listened to my uh, PowerPoint from last year with the Nerdy Bunch, and then also did one with Doug about the different theological stances and the different like secular philosophies and non-theism and all that. So words like monotheism, atheism, agnosticism, pantheism, etc. Those will come up as well, and then we're going to get into the other ones because that one has mostly to do with metaphysics. But if we're going to start, we should start on the first of the four major branches, which of course is metaphysics. And metaphysics to me kind of always sounded like a little bit of a pretentious word. but and sometimes in philosophy there is a lot of this stuff, a lot of pretentious kind of stuff going on, but it just really means the nature of reality. And the questions that are associated with metaphysics, as I mentioned just earlier, just a minute ago, are things like, is there a God? Is there an afterlife? What is the nature of reality? What is consciousness? Things like this. So, in this branch of philosophy, it has to deal with asking those types of questions. Why are we here? Is a metaphysical question. Where are we going? Is a metaphysical question. Just want to say hello to Shell. Shell, thanks for joining us. I hope you're not getting hit by the hurricane. I heard it's now called Milton. Wasn't it Helene before? Now Milton? Maybe they're two different ones. I'm not sure. But yeah, I guess you guys are getting some big rain and stuff. Whew, I wish you all the safety, Shell, for you and your loved ones in Florida. Um, I know it's hard. Hurricane season is tough. Hurricanes. Whew. But yeah, metaphysics, and just to go to so two different ones. Nothing's happening yet. Okay, okay. Well, again, hope everything's okay because I know Milton. I guess Milton and Helene are hitting different coasts, right, or whatever. It's awful, but hopefully everyone will be okay. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reference going back to I'm going to reference again that website philosophybasics.com. And the reason I'm going to do that is because it's very, very good at breaking down and understanding the different types of philosophies. And so just to give a basic overview, just what the definition is of metaphysics, according to philosophybasics.com, it says metaphysics is the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature of existence, being, and the world. Arguably, metaphysics is the foundation of philosophy. Aristotle calls it first philosophy, or sometimes just wisdom, and says it is the subject that deals with first causes and the principles of things. So questions would be, what is the nature of reality? How does the world exist? And what is its origin or source of creation? Does the world exist outside of the mind? How can the incorporeal mind affect the physical body? Incorporeal means without a form. If things exist, what is their objective nature? Is there a God or many gods or no God at all? So those are some of the basic questions that we're dealing with. So pretty heady stuff, obviously, to deal with existence and the mind and so forth. And metaphysics, of course, means literally means after physics. That's what sort of meta means when something is meta. And according to Aristotle, I just wanted to get into some three basic of his sections of metaphysics or his branches of metaphysics, which included something called ontology, which is the study of being and existence, including the definition and classification of entities, physical or mental, the nature of their properties, and the nature of change. Then there's natural theology, which is the study of God, including the nature of religion and the world, existence of the divine, questions about creation, and the various the various other religious or spiritual issues, and then universal science, the study of first principles of logic and reasoning skills, such as it says here, the law of non-contradictions. And so the basics of this is, if we look at, there's a lot we can talk about. Mind and matter, which is another one, but I'm going to get into that in a moment. Objects and properties, your identities, and so forth. So there's a lot going on when it comes to metaphysics, especially in the realm of like spirituality, religion, and so forth. So here's some of the questions that metaphysics kind of deals with when it gets to religion. And we can also talk about the philosophy of religion. Um, but for example, when I would have given the PowerPoints before on the theological stances and secular philosophies, they're all sort of intertwined in here. And I'm going to list some of them in this section, and then I'm going to go through some of them as well, just as an overview. But I'd it would really be helpful too, if you would like, is to reference that. So you can go back onto my channel and you can look under the different theological stances and secular philosophies, which I did with Doug Scott Kramer, may he rest in peace, and then also with the Nerdy Bunch with Marilyn and Chad and a few others about a year ago. But so, for example, if we're talking ultimately about the divine, one good question is, does the divine intervene directly in the world? That's theism. That's the idea of like a personal God. Or is it so functioned to be the first cause of the universe? That's deism. Is there one God, monotheism, many gods, polytheism, no gods, atheism or humanism? Or is it impossible to know, agnosticism? Are God and the universe identical, which would be either what's called pantheism or monism, or are they different, such as panentheism or dualism? And then just religious belief depend on faith and revelation, such as what's called, I think this is called fideism or deism. So these are all these kinds of different ideas of what we're sort of talking about when we talk about the nature and so forth. Um, you know, um, things like this. So it gets into a whole bunch of different things. Another thing is, we also talked a little bit about this before, which is free will and determinism. I mentioned this with biological and social determinism from a couple weeks back. How much do we actually have free will? And then how much are we just predetermined by our biology, our society, in order to do the things that we do? So you know, uh, I definitely think that these are very interesting questions. They also talk about things like cosmology and so forth. And I'll just get one moment while I get into the major schools of thought here. But hello, Huckleberry. Huckleberry, pork chop, Calhoun. There you go. I brought a friend. Hey, fantastic. You know each other. She's bionic. Oh, a brainiac. I just said bionic. Why am I reading that as bionic? She's a brainiac. Well, hello, brainiac. Hello, hello, pork chop, Huckleberry. That looks like a good sandwich. Good to see you here. Thank you so much for being a brainiac. There's always needs to be more of us, and there's a lot of here in my channel and of my subscribers who are brainiacs. So you're in good company here. But as you can kind of see, the way that metaphysics is rolling out, it deals with things like agnosticism, which is the belief that the existence of God is unknown and unknowable. Atheism, which is the belief that there is no God or the lack of belief in God. Deism is the belief that God exists but does not intervene with the universe. We have things like monism, which is the idea that um, God exists in the universe and it's all one energy, spiritual energy. There's monotheism, the belief in one God. There's naturalism, which, only natural forces exist and supernatural forces don't. There's panentheism, that is the belief that God and the universe are identical, but God is also transcendent. There's pantheism, which is God and the universes are the same. And then, of course, polytheism, many gods, and just regular old theism, which is the belief in a personal God. He's also a dedicated artist. Bet you she drew that sandwich. Yum. That's cool. But besides the theological stances, which are very, very fascinating, there's a bunch of other things that are involved. And I just want to, because there's a lot of them. So if you go to philosophybasics.com and you go to metaphysics and you go to the branches of the branches, and then you go to the different schools of metaphysics, I just want to click out a couple of them that I think are kind of cool. So the first one is actually called atomism. So like the atom, not Adam, like ADAM, like the male name, but atom, as in the atom, ATOM ism. And this is the idea that all of reality and all the objects in the universe are composed of very small, indivi- indivisible, and indestructible building blocks known as atoms. This leads logically to the position that only atoms exists and that there are no compositive objects such as parts. So that means that human bodies, clouds, and plants all do not exist. So this is how kind of cool we get into when we get into like metaphysics. This is how we sort of stretch and be like, hey, we're just a bunch of atoms, and therefore, that's all we are, right? Like that's kind of which is kind of cool. It says here it comes from Hinduism and Buddhism and stuff like this, and then there's different kinds of aspects. So that was kind of one I thought was a little far out. Um, the next one, essentialism. Let's look up that one. Essentialism, at its simplest, is the view that things have an essence, the attribute or set of attributes that makes an object or something substance what it fundamentally is. Thus, for any specific kind of entity, there is a set of characteristics, properties, or traits of which all of which any entity of that kind must have. A member of a specific kind of entity must possess other characteristics, but these neither establish nor preclude membership. It's again, we're getting into kind of cool stuff here, I think. And there's a whole bunch of different things here. I talked about, let's go to idealism. I'll just do a couple more because these ones we'll move on to the next one. But idealism is metaphysical, and it's the doctrine that ideas or thoughts make up reality. Essentially, it's any philosophy that argues that the only thing actually knowable is consciousness. And let me just pick out one more. Let me just go back here and see. She did draw it, and she loves talking in the third person. Oh, yum. Let me pick up another one here. Let's do realism. And here's another one just called realism, which is at its simplest and most general. It is the view that entities of a certain type have an objective reality, a reality that is completely ontologically independent of conceptual schemes, linguistic practices, and beliefs. Thus, entities, including abstract concepts and universals, as well as more concrete objects, have an existence independent or the act of perception and their independent names. Again, this is how heavy it kind of gets. I don't even really know what I just said, but there's just some types. So when we think of the first type, and please again go on to philosophybasics.com and you can look up metaphysics. So again, we're talking about metaphysics. We're talking about questions like what is the nature of reality? How does the world exist? What's its origin? What's the mind? Can there be something outside the mind, etc.? So that's metaphysics, okay? And again, that happens to be kind of heavy. I would say not necessarily as practical or as pragmatic as we're going to get into. And certainly I enjoy metaphysics, but it can be quite heavy. So now once you figure out all the different schools, you can be like, well, I'm an essentialist or or I'm a, whateverist, and you can learn how to debate those if you want with philosophical types of people, which are always fun, I think. But the next branch, as I said, I think is a pretty pragmatic, and this is epistemology. So the first one is metaphysics. The second is epistemology, and basically, epistemology is the study of the nature and scope of knowledge and justified belief. It analyzes the nature of knowledge and how it relates to similar notions such as truth, belief, and justification. It also deals with the means of production of knowledge as well as skepticism, about different knowledge claims. It is essentially about issues having to do with the creation and the dissemination of knowledge in a particular area of inquiry. So the questions here, an epistemological question would be, what is knowledge? How is knowledge acquired? What do people know? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions of knowledge? What is its structure and what are its limitations? What makes what makes justified beliefs justified? How are we able to understand the concept of justification? Is justification internal or external in one's mind? And it gives something here. It says a really interesting example is the kind of knowledge used, usually discussed in epistemology, is propositional knowledge, knowledge that, and opposes to knowledge how. So, for example, knowledge that is 2 plus 2 equals 4, as opposed to the knowledge of how, which is how do we go about adding numbers. So I kind of like this again. How do we know things? How can things be known? Which is really interesting. And then there's the idea of truth, right? So truth is broken down as, since false propositions cannot be known, for something to count as knowledge, it must be true. Belief, because one cannot know something that does not even, excuse me, belief, because one cannot know something that one doesn't even believe in. The statement, I know X, but I don't know X, is true and it's contradictory. And then justification is, as opposed to believing in something purely as a matter of luck. And if we look at, where does knowledge come from, we can kind of get into some, spiritual and religious territories. Is knowledge internal? So is it something that we do as humans, or does it come from something higher? So there is kind of a spiritual element in it, but not exactly, because it's more to do with knowledge rather than God or anything, or religion or so forth. But I think that one of the most interesting parts of this is that in Scientology, when I was studying Scientology, we use the word knowledge and to know very strongly. We have a very strong sense of knowledge. Hubbard is source, and he's the source of knowledge. Scientology is supposed to mean knowing how to know, and things like keeping Scientology working. One, the doctrines, the tech are true, and they're true because it's been observed, and because it's been observed, it is true. And so there's a lot of these very absolutist statements. Of course, in the end, it's all subjective, but that's not what we're taught. So I've always been rather interested in epistemology. And some of this stuff has to do, again, like, how do we know? Okay, so for example, there are some main theories. So imagine, how do we know things to be true, right? Well, we might have empirical data or empiricism, and that emphasizes the role of experience, especially experience based on um, observation, the five senses, and so forth. We might have things like science, even scientism could be part of this. We might have rationalism, which holds that knowledge is derived from experience, is not derived from experience, but rather acquired by a process that is innate or intuitive. We have the idea of representationalism, which holds that the world we see in conscious experience is not the real world itself, but merely a miniature virtual reality replica of that world in an eternal representation. Think of the Matrix here, which also Scientologists do kind of believe. And then constructivism, which is proposes that all knowledge is constructed and that is contingent on conventions such as human perception and social experience. So maybe when we go back to the idea of social determinism, right? I can know something in my own culture. You can know something in your other culture. It's kind of relativistic, and that would be a constructivist view. It would be like, well, I only know the things I know, not from an absolute standpoint, but only because I was born into a society or a culture that taught me these things. And if someone else is born and raised into another one, they would have a different set of knowledge and so forth. And then there wouldn't be anything called common sense at that point and so forth. We also get different groups like skepticism. This is a big one here. I know a lot of people I talked a little bit about it when we talked, of course, about science versus scientism. I'm a little hard sometimes on skeptics and scientific skeptics because they I like a lot of what they do, but I don't love everything they do. And a lot of what they do to me time tries to sometimes blur the line between like actual science itself and then actual like scientism. But I will say that being skeptical is not a bad thing at all. In many cases, it's just asking for evidence if someone makes a claim, especially in an argument setting. There can be ways to overdo it, and where you're not even able to have a conversation without full-on thought stopping of that's this and that's this fallacy and that's that fallacy and that's this fallacy, and you just can't have a conversation. So that is bad. However, just asking for evidence if someone's going to make a claim, especially in a world now with the internet where we have so much access to knowledge, but we have very little access to like actual good knowledge. And whatever good knowledge is subjective, mind you, but there is a lot of misinformation in the world. And so, sometimes just saying, "Hey, what's your source?" or "Who said it?" or, "Where did you get that information?" is not a bad thing. But the definition of skepticism within epistemology says it begins with the apparent impossibility of completing this infinite chain of reasoning, and argues that ultimately no beliefs are justified and therefore no one can really know anything. I want to say that's actually more what's called philosophical skepticism. That's the idea that we have to be doubtful of everything because we can't know everything, but there's different views on that. And if we look at some of these different understandings here, just go through a couple of different schools that have come out of epistemology. One is called foundationalism. It claims that some beliefs that support other beliefs are foundational and do not themselves require justification by other beliefs. There's something called instrumentalism, which is the methodological view that concepts and theories are merely useful instruments, and their worth is measured on how effective they are in explaining and predicting phenomenon. And of course, good old pragmatism. It just holds that something is true insofar as it works, which I want to say is another thing that Scientology claims. The tech works, so therefore it's true, right? So that's another thing. And then we'll go through some of the major doctrines here. I mentioned before things like empiricism, foundationalism. I'll look up this one. This one's called holism because I know I've talked about this before. But what is holism? So it says holism in general terms, whether in science, sociology, economics, linguistics, or philosophy, is the idea that all properties are given a system cannot be determined or explained by its component parts alone. Yeah, it has to be whole. So I know that I've talked about looking at sciences, for example, more holistically, especially religion, more holistically, where we can have our own personal experiences, positive or negative or neutral, but we have to take the whole sort of subject and look at it kind of holistically. So once again, I'll also, by the way, you know what? Because we talked about scientism before, I'll get into this here. So scientism is within the epistemology branch, and the definition is that scientism is the broad-based belief that the assumptions and methods of research of the physical and natural sciences are equally appropriate or even essential to all other disciplines, including philosophy, the humanities, and the social sciences. It is based on the belief that natural science has authority over all other interpretations of life, and that the methods of natural science form the only proper elements of any philosophy or inquiry. So again, it's that really like dogmatic, we know the truth kind of thing when of course you study science in high school, college, or university. That's not what's going to be introduced. Okay. So to wrap up our epistemology, that's the second branch, and it has to do with knowledge. We're asking here, what is knowledge? How is knowledge acquired? What do people know? What are the necessary and sufficient conditions of knowledge? What is its structure and limits, justifications, etc.? And hey there, Pete. No problem. So I just went through, Pete, and we talked about we're just doing basic definitions and stuff today because we're dealing with 4 topics. So just to give you a heads up, I just went through the first branch, which was metaphysics. I gave some definitions and examples, and we also looked at some schools of thought. And I just got completing epistemology, which has to do with knowledge and so forth. And now we're going to go on to ethics. So ethics kind of pretty self-explanatory, I think, right? When we think about ethics, we probably think about, having a good life, moral life, and so forth, and how can we do good and things like this. So this is the definition here. It's either ethics or moral philosophy. It's concerned with questions of how people ought to act and the search for a definition of right conduct, identified as the one causing the greatest good, and the good life in the sense of a life worth living, or a life, excuse me, that is satisfying or happy. It derives from the Greek word ethos, which means custom or habit. And it says ethics differs from morals and morality in that ethics denotes the theory of right action and the greater good, while morals indicate practice. And some questions might be, for example, how should people act? Um, what do people think is right? How do we take moral knowledge and put it into practice, which is applied ethics? And then, of course, so what does right even mean? One of the interesting One of the interesting things again, and I will always go back and make some notes on Scientology because a lot of people here are sort of Scientology watchers and never ends, is that L. Ron Hubbard, when you read, he's got a book, which I wish I had a copy of. I'll probably get one. I hope to get one soon because it's diluted, but it's called The Introduction to Scientology Ethics, and it's the basis for all rewards and punishments and stuff in Scientology. And you know what L. Ron Hubbard did? And like one of the first chapters, one of the first pages, he says, "Oh no, everyone's got it wrong, from Aristotle to everyone else." But he says, "I figured it out." Okay, is that when people talk about morals, they're really talking about ethics, and when people are talking about ethics, they're really talking about morals. Okay, thanks, Hubbard. And of course, I'm reading this and it's blowing my mind. Like you imagine, people from Plato and Aristotle and people we're going to get into here and all the moral philosophers and all these like famous people have contributed to the world and made it probably a better place in some way. Then Hubbard just goes, no, no, we're just going to switch the words around. So there you go, Hubbard. Oh yeah, philosophy of ethics gave me fits in college. I felt my brain dribbling out of my ears. I won't get too hard into this stuff because it's just a basic introduction. But that's some really interesting questions. I mean, think about some of these questions. I'll go over some of them when we're done with the 4 schools. But what do you think makes a good person? How do you apply ethics? Some people might have questionable ethics, but is that just an interpretation, etc.? So there's a difference of opinion here. Um, all different types. So the first one is called cynicism. Cynicism is from Greece, and it says is an ancient doctrine best exemplified by the Greek philosopher. Please don't kill me if I say this one. Diogenes of Sinope. I'm not good on my Greek words. Who lived in a tub on the streets of Athens. He thought that a life lived according to nature was better than one that conformed to convention, and that a simple life is essential to virtue and happiness. I'm not sure I agree, but it's okay. Hedonism, which of course posits that principal ethics is maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. We have the Stoic philosopher, Jesus, then we're going to have to say this, Epictetus, posited that the greatest good was uh, contentment, serenity, and peace of mind, which can only be achieved by self mastery over one's desires, emotions, and freedom from material attachments. Okay, we can look at that as almost the founding from Buddhism there. Humanism is another one. Humanism goes all the way back. Of course, it's morphed into different things now, but it says humanism emphasizes the dignity and worth of all people and their ability to determine right and wrong purely by the appeal of universal human qualities. It talks about the Greeks Thales, Xenophanes, and lots of other people's names. I don't want to butcher any Greek, so I'm going to stay away from that, but lots of Greeks one. And then it talks about here, it's sort of it's more based on logic, science, and it's not influenced by emotion, authority, or tradition. But the one thing that I kind of like is the more moral positing is things like consequentialism. So this is really interesting. So consequentialism argues that the morality of an action is contingent on the action's outcome or results. Thus, a morally right action is one that produces a good outcome or consequence. Consequentialist theories must consider questions like what sort of consequences count as good consequences, who is the primary beneficiary of moral actions, and how are the consequences judged and who judge them. So in one of them, we have this idea of utilitarianism. If you've known the gentlemen like Jeremy Bentham, John Stuart Mill, and again, this is a Hubbard connection. If anyone has ever done any, research into Hubbard's sort of ethics and philosophy, he's very much a utilitarian. You may have heard the greatest good for the greatest number of dynamics. We have the 8 dynamics in Scientology, right? Individual, relationships. It's been so long, guys. Nations and groups, mankind, humankind as a species. What is it? The physical universe, material universe, and then God. I don't even remember them. Someone please forgive me what the 8 dynamics are. But every action a Scientologist is supposed to do is to create a good outcome across all 8 dynamics. So not just for yourself, but for your family, for your groups, for your nations, for the physical universe, the spiritual universe, the animal universe. That's fifth dynamic. Anyway, and then ultimately to infinity, which they don't really define, or supreme being, which is kind of a joke in Scientology. But that's the idea. Utilitarianism, it holds that an action is right if it leads to the most happiness for the greatest number of people. So this is not anything that Hubbard, you know what I mean, invented or anything. It's just he stole it, of course. Then we have things like egoism, which holds that action is right if it maximizes good for oneself. We have the idea of asceticism, which is the opposite of egoism. It's described as a life characterized by the absence of egotistic pleasures to obtain a spiritual goal. So, like monks, for example, altruism, which is like selflessness rather than selfishness. And then there's one called deontology, which is an approach to ethics that focus on the rightness and wrongness of actions themselves, as opposed to the rightness or wrongness of consequences of those actions. And it sort of goes through some more. There's virtue ethics, which focuses on the inherited character of a person rather than the nature of the consequence. And then there's meta ethics. And again, we get into all this kind of stuff. It's just going to go through some of these things because it is kind of heavy. There's moral nihilism, which holds that ethical claims are generally false. That's good old Nietzsche for you. There's moral absolutism. Okay. You probably know people in your life who are like this, right? They're morally absolute. The ethical belief that there are absolute standards against which moral questions can be judged and that certain actions are right or wrong, regardless of their context. Moral universalism is a position that there's a universal ethic which applies to all people, regardless of culture, race, sex, religion, nationality, sexuality, and other distinguishing features. We could say this is like human rights, and some humanist philosophy and stuff like this would get into that. And of course, moral relativism, which is the position that moral or ethical positions do not reflect objective or universal moral truths, but instead there's more social, cultural, historical, and on and on and on. Okay, so that's a pretty good overview. Again, here we have things like altruism, asceticism, cynicism, egotism. There's like different kinds here. I wanted to click onto one school because it just caught my eye here called ethical naturalism. It says here it's a doctrine that our objective morals of which have to have empirical knowledge. That might be more into the scientism realm, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Hubbard is the ends justify the means, even if you break the law. As long as you're doing it for Scientology, then he literally says you can get away with murder. Although I don't, well, he literally says it. I don't know if he literally means it, but that's another thing. And then, yeah, forget the dynamics. It's you're not wrong, Pete. You're not wrong. I'd love to know Hubbard's thoughts on the trolley problem. That is a very good question. And I don't know how to answer that. I guess if Scientology benefits by, killing a group of people to save Scientology, right? You killed the group of people who aren't Scientologists to save Scientology in the most extreme sense, right? But I don't know. That's a good question. It's a very good question. Yeah, hedonism, we talked about subjectivism, humanism, individualism, absolutism, nihilism, relativism, and so on and so on. So again, when we're talking about ethics, just think about those certain questions, how people should act, what do people think is right, how do we take moral knowledge and put it into practice, and what does right even mean? And those are very good questions. And for the final school, and then we'll do like a brief overview, because again, this was just sort of I'll maybe give some of my thoughts as well, um, is aesthetics. And aesthetics is the branch of philosophy concerned with the nature and appreciation of art, beauty, and good taste. It has also been defined as critical reflection of art, culture, and nature. The word aesthetics derives from the Greek aesthetikos. I hope that's okay. Meaning the sense of perception, along with ethics. Aesthetics is a part of a study of values and judgments. And some questions that what they call aestheticians will ask is, what is a work of art? What makes a work of art successful? Why do we find certain things beautiful? How can things of very different categories be considered equally beautiful? Is there a connection between art and morality? Can art be a vehicle of truth? Are aesthetic judgments objective statements or purely subjective expressions of personal attitude? And can aesthetic judgments be improved or trained? So this is an interesting one because I think um, I'm sure some of us might remember. I think this goes back now 20 years when there was an artist, I believe, in New York City who was who drew a painting of the Virgin Mary, but in the painting there was also human feces. And of course, people got upset. And we could point to other artworks like this, the drawing of Muhammad, religious figures, etc. There are people who would say even abstract art, people like Jackson Pollock's or something like this, is not really art because it doesn't have any shape. It's sort of all over the place and anyone can do it, as opposed to a Monet or a Renoir or a Michelangelo. Those are the artists. And so this is really a big question, what does that really mean? Now, I just personally don't really like modern art or abstract art. I'm more into the impressionists and natural stuff, landscapes, whatever. But I'm not going to say it is an art because that's a perception, right? But again, this is where we get into these things. What is art? Is art that offends people, offends, people who worship the Virgin Mary or who are Muslim or Christian or whatever? Is that art? And how free are we to express that? And this is really what it kind of gets into. Talks about things like aesthetic universals, experience or virtuous, non-utilitarian pleasure. So I'll go back to that. Excuse me. Expertise or virtuoso. Technical artistic skills are cultivated, recognized, and admired. Non-utilitarian pleasure. People enjoy art for the art's sake and don't demand practical value of it. Style, artistic objects and performances satisfy rules of composition that place them in recognizable styles. Criticism, people make a point of judging, appreciating, and interpreted works of art. Intimidation, with a few important exceptions like music and abstract painting, works of art can stimulate experience in the world. Excuse me, imitation, not intimidation, forgive me. Special focus, artists set aside from ordinary life and made a dramatic focus of experience. And then imagination, artists and their audiences entertain hypothetical worlds in the theater of imagination. So these are really interesting questions, right? I mean, this is what kind of philosophy deals with. When we look at all these different questions and we have to sort of re-examine what we've been taught and look at different points of views and things like this. And I have my own, I guess, philosophies that I like, maybe more than others. I don't think they're necessarily better or worse, but certainly we wrestle with these things. So if we look at like I'm just going to go back to metaphysics, and then I'll go through and give some thoughts on sort of these four things. So metaphysics again, it seems to be the most heady. You're dealing with substances a lot. Some people just say they don't care. But I do think that there's value in examining the theological stances and we would call, the theological stances, like what do those things mean? What do they mean to you as an individual? Where do you sit? And ultimately, everyone's going to have a bit of a different answer and a reason because we do pull from different experiences based on our religious upbringing, education, personal experiences in the world, people we've met, books we've read, and so forth. And so ultimately, just taking some time and being like, okay, this is the thing. We could argue about, atomism, essentialism, and all this kind of stuff, which talks about substances, and that's a bit more heavy. But I do think it's interesting to be presented with a multitude of different theological stances, what their definitions are, what do they mean, even if it seems a little bit heady and impractical, it's still interesting to give people choices. And so that was, for example, my intent when talking to Doug Scott Kramer and then to Marilyn and the Nerdy Bunch, which is, there's a lot of choices. Here are them. Here are they. I have my theological stance, but that's just me. I don't want to influence other people because it's up to you. So that's the idea of metaphysics, at least, nature of reality. And I think those are very interesting questions because I think a lot of people ask them from time to time. When we go to epistemology, I like this a little bit more because I guess maybe it's a Scientology thing, but even before Scientology, if you're ever in a discussion, a debate, an argument with someone and they say something and it just really is off-putting, you know, politically, religiously, socially, whatever, and it's so off-putting and they say they know it to be true. And I don't know, I'm always curious about that. I've gotten into trouble because of that, of course, because in every society there are what some people would call sacred cows or taboo subjects. We all know that this thing happened. But even if we look at the history of our own countries, history of Canada, America, Great Britain, there's a lot of bad stuff. And when I was growing up, we didn't know a lot of those things. And now we know more of those things and so on. So it would be interesting to just say, like, hey, like, this thing is true, absolutely true, let's say. But like, how do you actually know that? What is your source? Where did you get it from? And a lot of times it could be from, something empirical, or it could be from something based on someone's experience, because the truth we get from knowledge can be a capital T truth. It can be observable. but it could also be a small T truth. It can be just something through our own experiences, and I think both of which are okay. Then when we get to ethics, to me, that's the one that I have the biggest questions on, um, which is like, I don't really know, like, I don't really think about ethics that much, you know? I don't know if anyone else like that. It's like you just assume that you're doing the right thing. You assume that I have an ethical philosophy, but like, what is it? I don't know. I know that I don't want to do bad things that would, end up in jail or something or do illegal things. I have no criminal record. But like, it's one of those things like what is it? And there's a lot of people that will say they know, right? They know how to act. They have this particular philosophy. I'm sure I do, but it's a big open question for me. And I think that's okay as well if it is for you too. Hey, thanks, Uncle Barry. I hope to see you around again. Thank you so much. Thank you, Shell, also for introducing her here. Appreciate that. Yep, victors do tend to write the history books. Exactly. Exactly. So that's a big one on knowledge, right? Like, how did they even know? Just because they won a war, what does that mean? But with ethics, it's always to me that's the one where I'm a little bit more quote unquote agnostic, I guess, or just even more curious because I don't really know where my ethics come from. I'm trying to figure out where that comes from because obviously Scientology poisoned that well, but it's a tough one. And then aesthetics is great. As I said, I just always think it's great to think about like what really is art. Like how do we judge it? Is Jackson Pollock and versus Monet? What is more or less art? What is beauty? I mean, some people pick up books and they say it's the worst book I've ever read. I can't stand it. And other people pick it up and it changes their life. And it's like, what does that mean? And so again, I really think going to if you want a more in-depth look on anything I talked about today, because this was just an introduction to some of the basic ideas. Please go to philosophybasics.com. Look up what we've talked about. You can get lost in a rabbit hole if you want there, but it's a very good website. Also, if there's anything I touched on today, and I'm just thinking now, maybe for my second option next week is to discuss a philosophy within a Scientology concept because I touched on the metaphysics and stuff. So maybe I can do that. I'll bring it up again on Saturday to see if people want to do that, along with talking about pseudoscience. But maybe that's something people want or don't want. I don't know. But I hope this has been, a good episode here. This was a little bit more off the cuff. It wasn't as much pontificating, which I don't like that word, but it wasn't as much as I did, last week or the week before. But I can definitely get back on into doing that. Which again, there's so many topics that we can do. But again, I hope you found this useful. Just examining these different branches, what they mean, and please, again, go to philosophybasics.com if you want more information. So, just to let you all know, even though, again, today is Tuesday, um, I'm busy tomorrow, so that's why we're having it now. If you're going to join us on Saturday, which I really, really hope that you do, Saturday, 12 noon in the Pacific Coast, 3 p.m. on the Eastern Time Zone if you're in North America, 8 p.m. in the UK. We're going to talk about, I'm going to do the first part of a two-part presentation, PowerPoint presentation on the German Civil War and German Revolution from 1918 until 1919. So that's the first part. And then roughly from around 1919 until around 1924 will be the second part. And we're going to talk about communist uprisings in Berlin. We're going to talk about Bavaria, what happened there. We're going to talk about the rise of the National Socialist German Workers' Party, which we know is the Nazi Party. And we're going to talk about historical actors like Rosa Luxemburg and people like Ernst Toller, and of course Hitler and so forth eventually in the second half. But I think it's a very, very interesting time. And I think it's a good cautionary tale. I think it's, for extremes. You have an extreme on one end and extreme on the other end, and we're going to see how those extremes got a hold of power, and then what happened when they lost power. So I hope again, hope you really enjoyed our chat here today. And please look out for my channel. Thank you again to everyone who's new, who came on after Sunday with Marilyn. I'm over 100 now, 113 subscribers, which I think is fantastic. Thank you again. Thank you to everyone who was here before, was here after, here in the future. I really appreciate it. If you have any comments, you have any questions, you have any concerns, just please throw them into the comments. Just be respectful. As I said, if there's anything that I needed to elaborate on, didn't touch on, because again, it was just a basic overview and definition. But I can, do more in the future if demand shall have it. Finally, can you say goodbye in Hungarian just to be different? I will close out in English, but for Hungarian, if we're going to say good night, we're going to say Jó éjszakát kívánok, and if we say goodbye, we say viszontlátásra or viszlát. But in case I don't see you, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.